hopefully I'm centered. I'm gonna try to center myself as much as possible, but hopefully I'm also in focus. Listen, I just got a new camera and it's not the sort of camera that you can like flip the screen around and see yourself. So I've been doing sort of videos on like one of my other channels, and like I've been out of focus, I've been on the side, like not in the center of the video, and it's just a lot of craziness. Regardless, we're gonna try to make it through this video. Hello everybody, it's Brianna the Slow Reader, and I read some more books. Surprisingly. I don't even know why I said I read some more books. I read like one book, and today I'm going to talk about it. This video is probably going to be a lot shorter just because the book wasn't necessarily that long. It was like 145 pages, so like it's not like an epic saga, you know? So the book I read is called The Blacker the Berry by Wallace Thurman. If you watched my last video, I did some sort of book haul, sort of. It's weird because like it wasn't necessarily books that I bought. It was just a shit ton of books my best friend gave me. Please go watch that video if you haven't seen it. But we're gonna go ahead and talk about The Blacker the Berry. So the whole idea of this book is that it goes deep into one woman's story and her issues with the idea of colorism. If you don't know what colorism is, I suggest that you probably look it up, just because the way I describe it probably won't be as in-depth as like you just looking it up. But colorism is basically the idea of, especially when it comes to minority groups of people, usually the African American or Black community, it's the idea that lighter skin is usually better or treated more preferably than like darker skin. And so that's kind of like what this book gets into. So to give some context, our main character's name is Emmylou Morgan, and she's basically trying to figure out where she fits into the world, you know, trying to get a job, trying to get an education, trying to see what she can and can't do. And there's a lot of things where her issue is not only is she Black, but she's very, very, very dark. So it's like, it's the idea that she's not only Black, but she's too Black. Where like, when you're like a very dark skinned girl, she struggles a lot more than like my kind of complexion, where like I'm obviously brown-ish versus like, I don't know how to say it without, how do I say this without being offensive? Very dark. She's very, very dark. I don't want to be offensive. I'm not really interested in spoiling what happens in the book, more so than I am about talking about some of the themes and ideas that Thurman kind of like presents in this book, that kind of goes along with colorism. So the first thing that we need to talk about is the idea of the way, kind of like, the first thing I want to talk about is more of Emmylou's like family and the way she was brought up. So the idea is that her family started this group, I guess. I don't know what it's called. It's like, it's not like a sorority, but it's like a women's circle that they have, and it's called the Blue Vein Group. It's called Blue Vein because in order to join the social circle, you have to be light enough where you can see like the blue of your veins through your skin, aka you gotta be like really, 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 really light skinned. And like they had like a saying or a motto or something that was like lighter and lighter every generation, where the idea is that you marry a light-skinned man, that way you could have a light-skinned baby, and the baby would be like lighter than you. That way every generation they get kind of closer and closer to basically white. And this concept was mostly passed down from the mothers. and it was passed down from like mother to daughter, mother to daughter, mother to daughter. So the thing that kind of how do I put this? What's the word I'm trying to use here? The thing that kind of broke this cycle was that Emma Lou's mother had married a dark-skinned man. He was very dark, and then they had a baby. They ended up divorcing, and the dad is like non-existent. I can't remember what happened to him. He like ran off for work and like never came back. I can't remember. He wasn't like a super big role in the story, but it's mentioned somewhere in there. So he ran off, and then like her mother's kind of stuck with this dark-skinned baby, and they have stuck. And then kind of she's growing up, and everybody's like, oh, she has really nice like hair, which that's a whole nother concept in Black culture that is a whole nother video in and of itself, honestly. Actually, I think black hair has been talked about lately with that Netflix movie, Nappily Ever After, or something like that. But that's something else completely. Her whole family is like, she has really nice hair, but it's just that she's so dark, and, keep talking about how she's so dark. And I think what was interesting in the book is that the idea of colorism is mostly enforced by women rather than men, because a lot of the men in the book didn't necessarily like say these things or enforce this idea of like you have to be light-skinned. That being said, there is a reason why the women do this, and I think mostly because the book also brings up the idea of that black girls, when it comes to colorism affects like women more than it does men. I don't necessarily know how true that is, because like I haven't really been affected by colorism per se, more necessarily than just like straight up racism. But I think there has been some stuff where it's like I've definitely faced with like you don't act black enough. I've experienced that, but I don't know if that really counts I don't think that counts as colorism per se. But I don't know how true that is. From the way, like historically, the book is very good at giving historical context and like kind of explaining why the idea of colorism is worse for women than for men, where like when it comes to things like Broadways, or even being a receptionist, or even being a typist, or whatever job there is where people can see you, they prefer to have light-skinned women or light-skinned women in the forefront, and then the darker girls, in the back where it's harder to see them and stuff. Or there was a lot of places where Emily would try to get a job, and they would be like, well, we only hire a certain complexion. And it was just, it's interesting because obviously when women have it harder, it gives them this idea of like, you need to be light-skinned, you need to be light-skinned, you need to be light-skinned. So they take that idea and kind of put it, you know what I'm saying? I'm not good at explaining things, Jesus Christ. But like they take that idea and pass it down to their daughters, and it's part of the reason why women typically take it or enforce this cycle of colorism a lot harder than like men do, because men typically don't say these sorts of things. And throughout the book, Emma Lou does have moments where she was like, if only I was born a boy, or if only I was a boy, then I'd be able to get through life perfectly fine, because, black men don't necessarily have the same issues as black women. Like, they don't have the same troubles where they can still get a job just fine. They can still get an education just fine. And when it comes to black women, it's like a lot harder. It's a lot to think about. I don't necessarily know how much I agree with what she's saying, because it's definitely like in the realm of like, I have it worse than you, or no, I have it worse, and then I have it worse, and that sort of like, that sort of gray area I'm not a big fan of, but I thought that idea was interesting. I'm trying to see, I have notes, not a lot of crazy notes, but I have notes, and I'm trying to make sure I get through most of like what I wanted to say. I'm gonna stay on the topic of themes real quick. I wrote these notes all sorts of crazy, so if it feels like I'm skipping around, that's mostly my fault, but I'm gonna try to keep these topics under certain categories and stuff. But I think the other theme that I kind of wanted to address was black men and their role in the whole colorism cycle. And it's very different from like how women perpetuate colorism, just because women will enforce all these ideas of like lighter skin is better, you need to be light skinned, you need to protect your skin, all this and that. Black men, and I think it was kind of, I feel like the book greatly exaggerated it, but it was a concept that almost every black man is not interested in black women unless it's for sex. They're not interested in dating them. They're not interested in like marrying them. They're not interested in like having any sort of serious relationships with them. And there's like a lot of concepts and slurs which come from like back in the day, that I think some black men still have this concept, but it's mostly a sign of like self-hatred, where it's like they don't date black girls or they don't date dark-skinned girls, they only date light-skinned girls. And that's a whole nother thing in and of itself. I'm trying to keep this video short, I really am. But it was like a lot of these things where black men would say like they don't haul no coal, black cats must go. It was another one. It's like really old sayings that basically just mean that they don't date dark-skinned girls or black girls. And they would say these things, not only would they like not date dark-skinned girls, but they would also make fun of like, they would ridicule people. Like if there was another guy in their friend, like, how do I say this? If there was another guy in their friendship circle and one of them brought like a black girl around and was trying to like introduce her or something, they would say like, yo, she gotta go, black cats must go, like we don't like no dark-skinned girls, pretty much. And I was like, that's just as bad as like like pretty much what a lot of older women do with the whole like light skin thing and all that stuff. But that's kind of like the men's role in like the whole colorism, well, I'll say black men's role in the whole colorism cycle. And it was interesting to see it play out, just because I think Emma Lou did run into characters that didn't necessarily care what shade or complexion she was, but because she wasn't interested in them, she just didn't decide to court them or date them or marry them. Like she just wasn't interested in them. So I think for that much, that was with the themes. From here on out, I want to talk a lot about Emma Lou. So let's try to talk about Emma Lou's characterization some. So I feel like overall, after I finished reading the book, there was a lot to digest with Emma Lou. And I think, first of all, pretty much I feel like her whole story is more about her fighting colorism and trying to see where she fits in the world and all that good stuff. And like, she kind of doesn't know. And there was a lot of self-hatred in this book. Emma Lou hated herself so much. And typically, you can tell, it's very easy to tell if someone of color like hates themselves is if they often criticize people that have their complexion or a complexion that's similar to theirs. So for example, Emma Lou is very dark skinned. So throughout most of the book, which was a good couple of years, I didn't add up the years, it's a lot of years, basically all throughout college, all throughout her time in New York, all throughout most of her, a good couple of like the beginning of her 20s, and I think going into her 30s, I'm not sure. What's the word? Prejudice. She wasn't interested in like dark-skinned man whatsoever. If you tried to talk to her, she like went on some dates with some black men, but like she basically ignored them the whole time. So like they never called her back. That never went anywhere. So she did meet, I feel like Emmylou did meet men that were interested in her, that didn't necessarily care for the whole colorism crap, but at the same time, she just didn't give them the time of day. And she was so desperate for dating or marrying a lighter skinned man that she would cling to them when they obviously weren't good for her, they obviously weren't interested. But it was just that she wanted to be with a light-skinned man so bad. And there was a time where while she was in college, she ran into another girl that was also dark-skinned, but she didn't really like her for a lot of different reasons. But there was just a whole scene where she's like, internally, she's like really annoyed by this girl, but she doesn't like tell her. Like, she doesn't say like, hey, I'm not really interested in being friends with you. She doesn't say that. It's more just like she's trying to get away from her. I feel like Alva was like definitely not proud to like show her off and have her meet his friends and all this sort of stuff. So I think ultimately he just like wasn't proud of her, and he took her to places where like they were making fun of her skin. For example, he took her to this like I guess it was like a play, cabaret. I'm gonna say it's a play. Where it was definitely racist. There was definitely blackface happening. And there was definitely a scene where all these men are having some sort of party get together thing. And this, on the stage, a dark-skinned woman, also blackface, a dark-skinned woman kind of comes in and crashes their party. And like, they're all just like, how dare this woman crash our party and whatnot. And then they kind of start like they're literally pushing her towards like each other, like back and forth, and like arguing with each other over like who invited her until they finally kick her out. And it was just kind of like this very large spectacle where like the audience was very comically laughing. They just thought it was hilarious. The funniest thing they've ever seen in their lives. At pretty much her expense, and it kind of made Emmylou feel some sort of way where it was like they're laughing at me, which like kind of. By the way, I'm sorry I sound very nasally. I'm trying not to get sick, but I usually get sick because it's fall, so I always get like kind of sick when the weather changes. That is to say, ultimately, that Emmylou and like Alva get into an argument, and like Alva saying you're too, you're hypersensitive or something like that to your color. You're so hypersensitive and this, that, and the third. And I think to some degree throughout that argument, both of them make points where they're both right and they're both wrong. And the fact that Emmylou is very sensitive to her color. But I also think she's experienced so many things that at that point society has made her that way. Her family has made her that way, where she can barely get a job. She can barely find housing. She can like barely find these places that will accept her pretty much. And I mean, she found some places where she can work where it's like most of the time during that time period, black women worked jobs where they were either a washwoman, aka doing laundry and stuff. They would wash by hand, so they would wash rich people's clothes. You were a maid, or you were a public school teacher, or in Emmylou's case, she worked backstage. I forgot the actual title of like what they were called back then, but she worked backstage and like helped this actress like change between her scenes and stuff. Basically, her maid for like the show. Anyway, her and Alva kind of argue about this, where it's like you're way too sensitive about your color, and Emmylou does know this, but she feels like, oh, it's because of my color, and she lets that fact hold her back. And I think that's kind of where the disconnect was. That being said, because I don't want this video to be too long, I think ultimately it's a good read. It has some typos, which raised some exclamation points in my eyes. But this technically isn't published by the original publisher. Yeah, this is by Dover Publications, but it was originally published by the Macaulay Company in New York in 1929. This is a republished version in 2008. So I'm not sure what's going on with these typos. But I think it's a good read just for the sake of like learning about colorism. Definitely some good historical background in here. I think towards the end things got weird, especially for the pace of the book, where it was like we learned a lot about Emma Lou and how she feels and what she thinks, and she's a very passive character, and like it's very much so one of those stories where like things just happen to her, but like she doesn't do anything about it, and like nothing exactly happens. She's just kind of like on standby. It's like one of those sorts of things until like you get to like the last 50 pages and like all this shit starts flying. Like the everything just picked up pace, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. But I think for the sake, oh, voice crack, Jesus. I think for the sake of understanding the story and all this, it's a good idea to like dive into this book. It's definitely like a good book for the culture and all that great stuff. So, I think towards the end, I was kind of curious, which, there was a scene where Emma Lou kind of comes into the apartment with, she was living in at the time with Alva. And like, Alva has friends over, but like, the way it's described is like she comes in and there's this effeminate boy on his like arm, and Alva is very much so a character that's like very flirty with women. Like he's like a heartthrob with women. He's definitely a player, but then he has this effeminate male that he's very much so like in his arms, it was described. And the guy whose name is Bobby, so the boys, Bobby like rushes off and like goes to sit, because they're on the bed, and he goes to sit in a chair like across from him, and he's trying to like play everything off. And like the other friends start leaving because it's like Emma Lou shows up and it's just kind of quiet, and then they all start leaving, and like Alva's trying to get them to stay, but they end up leaving. And then Bobby tries to leave, and he like grabs him and makes him sit back down, and I'm like, is Alva gay, or like is he bi? Because that's some real tea. That really was some tea, and it was like literally in like the last 5 pages, and I was like, you can't just throw that in there in the last 5 pages. My God. All right. I feel like as soon as I end this video, I know I'm gonna leave something out, and I'm gonna hate myself for it. I'm gonna forget to say something, but yes, thank you for now. Thank you for watching this video. If you're interested in The Blacker the Berry, I'll probably find some sort of link where you can find it and buy it, or maybe go to your local library. Thank you for watching this video. I really don't have an outro. I still need to work on that. Oh, very quickly, up next, I'm going to look at, up next is Perfect Peace by Daniel Black. I have another book by him somewhere that I'm planning on reading, but this is a thick book. It looks like about 400-ish pages. 341 pages. I'm going to try to get through as much as I can, but this one is probably going to take me a hot second. My best friend annotated this, so I'm going to have a ball with this one. This book is mostly about a lot of gender and gender identification. Most likely I'm going to have to remind myself to use they for the video for that, so I don't be offensive. But you have this child named Perfect who biologically was born a boy. However, their mother made the child grow up as a girl until the child was like 7, and then was like, no, you're not a girl, never mind, you're a boy, and you're gonna like live the rest of your life as a boy now. And it talks about that experience, especially with the family and how the family feels and like reacts to all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting. So I'm gonna read this over the time that I probably disappear for like another month and a half, and a video will come out about this. So expect that to happen.